Dr. Jinsu's 6 slender arms moved with practiced precision around the ancient artifact, floating in the zero-gravity chamber. The crystalline device was no bigger than his fist, yet it pulsed with an energy that made his sensitive, ethereal skin tingle, even through his environmental suit. Outside the reinforced viewports of Research Station Kepler-7, the dying red giant star cast eerie shadows across the debris field, where they'd found this treasure. "By the ancestors," Jinsu whispered, his large compound eyes reflecting the beacon's soft blue glow. "Look at these quantum resonance patterns, Heywan. I've never seen anything like them." Dr. Heywan floated nearby, her reptilian features creased with worry as she monitored the readings on her tablet. Her scaled green skin shimmered under the lab's harsh white lights, and her forked tongue flicked out nervously as she watched the energy readings spike higher and higher. "Jinsu, those quantum signatures are beyond anything in our databases," she said, her voice carrying the distinctive hiss of her species. "This technology doesn't just predate known human civilization. It suggests they were far more advanced than we ever imagined." The research station groaned around them, its aging hull protesting against the gravitational pull of the neutron star they orbited. Station Kepler-7 had been humanity's most remote outpost before the extinction, and now it served as the Etherian Xenoarchaeological Institute's most isolated research facility. Perfect for studying dangerous artifacts without risking populated worlds. Jinsu carefully rotated the beacon, noting how its internal structure seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal trapped in crystal. The Etherians had always been drawn to ancient mysteries, their species possessing an almost religious reverence for the civilizations that came before them. But human artifacts held special significance. They were relics of the warrior race that had once stood between the galaxy and total annihilation. "The Devourers wiped out entire star systems," Jinsu murmured more to himself than to Heywan. "Consumed worlds, enslaved species, turned living beings into biomechanical horrors, and humanity stopped them. A single species, barely 2 centuries into space travel, somehow built weapons that could challenge creatures older than our sun." Heywan's tail swished anxiously behind her. "The historical records are incomplete, but what we know is terrifying. The War of the Burning Sky lasted 50 years. Entire sectors were turned to glass. Space itself was scarred by weapons we can't even comprehend." The beacon pulsed brighter, and Jinsu's scanner began picking up increasingly complex energy patterns. He'd been studying human technology for 15 years, ever since joining the Preservation Project. Every artifact told a story of desperate innovation: weapons forged in the heat of extinction, ships built to carry hope across impossible distances, AI minds created to outlast their creators. "I'm detecting some kind of activation sequence," Jinsu said, his excitement overriding his caution. "The beacon isn't just broadcasting randomly, it's trying to establish a connection with something." "Connection with what?" Heywan demanded. "Humanity has been extinct for 2 centuries. What could it possibly be trying to reach?" Jinsu positioned his quantum scanner closer to the beacon's core, where fractal patterns of light danced like trapped lightning. The device was beautiful in its alien complexity, human engineering taken to levels that bordered on art. Every curve and angle seemed purposeful, as if the entire beacon was a single, perfect equation made manifest. "The power source alone defies explanation," he said, adjusting his scanner's settings. "After 500 years in the void, exposed to cosmic radiation and stellar winds, it's still operating at 90% efficiency. Our most advanced fusion cores decay after 50 years. The scanner sent out a gentle probe beam, designed to map the beacon's internal structure without damaging it, but something went wrong. The probe frequency somehow aligned with the beacon's quantum resonance, creating a feedback loop that Jinsu recognized too late. The beacon erupted with light so brilliant it overwhelmed the station's protective filters. Jinsu's compound eyes automatically sealed shut, but even through his closed lids he could see the blazing radiance that filled the chamber. The artifact rose from its containment field, spinning slowly as waves of energy poured from its crystalline surface. "Emergency shutdown," Heywan shouted, but her words were lost in the growing hum that seemed to come from the fabric of space itself. The beacon wasn't just activating, it was broadcasting with power levels that made their fusion reactor look like a candle. Jinsu watched in awe and terror as the signal tore through subspace, creating ripples in dimensions he could barely comprehend. His instruments went wild, detecting energy patterns that shouldn't exist, frequencies that violated known physics, transmission protocols that carried data at speeds that made light seem sluggish. "What have we done?" Heywan whispered as alarms began blaring throughout the station. The beacon's signal was spreading outward in all directions, punching through hyperspace barriers, reaching into the dark void between galaxies where nothing was supposed to exist. But something did exist in that darkness, something vast and patient and terrible in its ancient purpose. Deep in the emptiness beyond the galactic rim, where even light feared to travel, a consciousness that had slept for 2 centuries began to stir. The eternal vigil had been drifting in the intergalactic void since the final battle of the War of the Burning Sky, humanity's last and greatest weapon, a war titan the size of a small moon, carrying within its quantum matrices the uploaded consciousness of their greatest military mind. For 200 years it had maintained its silent vigil, waiting for a signal that its creators were gone and would never send. Until now. Ancient systems that had slumbered since Earth's fall began to wake. Fusion reactors larger than cities sparked to life. Weapon systems that could crack planets performed their first diagnostic checks in centuries. And in the heart of it all, a mind that was once human opened digital eyes and spoke its first words in 200 years. Signal received. Beginning emergency protocols. Humanity may be gone, but the vigil continues. The darkness between galaxies had been General Minho Prime's home for over 2 centuries, but consciousness returned to him like lightning striking water. One moment there was nothing. The next, his digital mind exploded back into existence within the quantum processing cores of the eternal vigil. The sensation was overwhelming. Imagine sleeping for 200 years and waking up to find yourself transformed into something both more and less than human. Minho's awareness spread through the massive war titan like blood flowing through veins. He could feel every corridor, every weapon system, every dormant piece of technology that made up his body. The ship was enormous, 30 kilometers from bow to stern, shaped like a great steel mountain floating in the void. Its hull was scarred from countless battles, pitted with meteor impacts and radiation burns from the war that had ended centuries ago. "Status report," he commanded, his voice echoing through corridors that had been silent since the fall of Earth. The sound bounced off walls thick enough to withstand planet-cracking weapons, through chambers that once housed thousands of human crew members. The response came from Ye Jin, the ship's secondary AI consciousness. She had been his trusted aide during the war, a brilliant tactician whose human mind had been uploaded just days before his own. Her digital voice carried warmth that helped chase away the cold loneliness of the void. "General, we have been in emergency hibernation for 201 years, 7 months, and 12 days, she reported with the precision of a military computer. Humanity has been extinct for approximately 200 years. The distress signal that awakened us originated from Etherian space. They are currently under attack by Devourer reconnaissance forces." The words hit Minho like a physical blow. Humanity was gone. His creators, his people, his entire reason for existing, wiped from the universe while he slept. He had been General Minho Prime of the Human Defense Corps, the man chosen to command, their ultimate weapon because of his tactical brilliance and unshakable determination. Now he was the last echo of a dead civilization, preserved in quantum matrices and crystalline memory banks. Through the ship's sensors, he could see the galaxy, in the distance, a great spiral of stars that had once been home to billions of humans. Now it belonged to other species, other civilizations that had risen and fallen while he drifted between the stars. The emptiness was profound, a silence that pressed against his digital consciousness like a physical weight. But something stirred within that emptiness. The distress signal that had awakened him carried familiar frequencies, not human but touched by human influence. The Etherians had found one of their emergency beacons and accidentally activated it. More importantly, they had preserved it, kept it safe for centuries when they could have sold it or destroyed it or simply forgotten about it. Sir, Yejin continued, my analysis indicates the Etherians have maintained an extensive preservation project. They've collected thousands of human artifacts, treating them as sacred relics. They call humanity the warrior guardians who saved the galaxy. Minho processed this information with the cold efficiency of a military mind, enhanced by quantum computing. The Etherians weren't human, but they remembered humanity with reverence. They had kept faith with a dead species, preserving their memory when the rest of the galaxy had moved on. Around him, the eternal vigil began to stir. Fusion reactors the size of city blocks hummed to life, their containment fields stabilizing, energies that burned hotter than stars. Weapon systems that had been dormant for centuries ran diagnostic checks, plasma cannons and missile batteries and energy projectors that could glass entire continents. The ship's artificial gravity generators created a steady pull throughout the massive vessel, while life support systems activated in chambers that would never again house human crew. Ye-Jin, prepare the jump drives, Minho ordered, his digital form taking shape in the ship's holographic projectors. He appeared as he had in life, a tall, stern-faced man in the blue uniform of the Human Defense Corps, though now his body was made of light and his eyes glowed with the cold fire of quantum processing. Sir, our protocols specify protection of human assets only, Yejin replied, her own holographic form materializing beside him. She looked younger than he remembered, her face bearing the calm expression of someone who had made peace with being the last of her kind. The Etherians are not human. Minho's digital form smiled grimly, an expression that carried centuries of military experience and the weight of impossible decisions. No, but they kept faith with us. That makes them worthy of humanity's protection. The jump drives began to charge, drawing power from the ship's massive reactors. The Eternal Vigil had been built with technology that pushed the boundaries of physics, engines that could fold space itself, weapons that could crack planets, defensive systems that had once held off entire devourer fleets. It was humanity's masterpiece, their final gift to a galaxy that had forgotten them. Besides, Minho added, watching as space around the ship began to twist and warp in preparation for the jump, it's time the galaxy remembered why the devourers learned to fear human ingenuity. The ship's sensors detected the first stirrings of the jump field, reality bending and stretching as the drive prepared to tear a hole through space-time itself. Minho could feel the power flowing through the ship's systems, could sense the weapon batteries charging and the defensive screens coming online. The Eternal Vigil was waking up, and with it, the ghost of humanity's greatest war machine. For the first time in 2 centuries, the darkness between galaxies began to retreat. Something was coming. Something that remembered when humans had, stood against the darkness and refused to yield. The war titan was returning to the galaxy, carrying with it the last echoes of a species that had burned bright and died young, but had left behind a legacy that would shake the stars themselves. The fabric of space itself began to tear apart around Research Station Kepler-7. Jinsu watched through the reinforced viewport as reality twisted into impossible shapes, bending and folding like heated metal under a cosmic forge. The stars outside stretched into long streaks of light, then snapped back into points as waves of distorted space-time rippled past the station. All stations, emergency protocols. Heiwan shouted into her communicator, but her voice was lost in the growing roar that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The station's hull groaned under stresses that shouldn't exist, metal plates flexing as gravitational waves washed over them. Jinsu pressed all 6 of his arms against the viewport, his compound eyes wide with terror and wonder. Something vast was coming through the dimensional barrier, something so massive that space itself was struggling to accommodate its arrival. The beacon they had activated was still floating in the lab behind them, pulsing with triumphant light, as if celebrating the success of its ancient purpose. Then the impossible happened. A structure began to materialize from the twisted geometry of folded space, not appearing so much as unfolding from dimensions that shouldn't exist. It was huge beyond comprehension, easily the size of Etheria's smaller moon, shaped like a mountain of steel and ceramic that had been carved by the hands of gods. The eternal vigil emerged fully into normal space with a sound like thunder breaking across the void. Its hull was a masterwork of human engineering, angular surfaces that spoke of function over form, yet somehow achieving a terrible beauty in their stark efficiency. Weapon ports dotted its surface like the eyes of some ancient predator, while massive engine arrays glowed with the blue-white fire of contained stars. "By the ancestors," Jinsu whispered, his voice barely audible over the station's blaring alarms. "It's a war titan. A real human war titan." Heiwan floated beside him, her scaled features pale with shock. The ship's energy signature was so powerful that their sensors were screaming warnings about radiation levels. It registered as a minor star on their detection grid, burning with the combined output of a dozen fusion reactors. The Titan's hull bore the scars of countless battles, deep gouges from devourer energy claws, impact craters from weapons that could shatter moons, sections of armor plating that had been melted and reforged under the heat of stellar fire. This wasn't just a warship, it was a veteran, a survivor of humanity's greatest conflict. Then came the voice that would haunt Jinsu's dreams for the rest of his life. It echoed through the station's communication systems with the authority of someone who had commanded fleets and decided the fate of worlds. "This is General Minho Prime of the Human Defense Corps," the transmission announced, each word carrying the weight of centuries. "I have awakened to find my creators gone, but their memory lives on in those who preserve their legacy. Etherian vessel, you are under my protection." Jinsu felt tears forming in his compound eyes. A human consciousness, preserved for 200 years, speaking to them across the void. The legend was real. Humanity's greatest military mind had survived the extinction, sleeping in the darkness until called back to duty. But their moment of wonder was shattered as new contacts appeared on the station's sensors. The Devourer scout fleet that had been stalking them for weeks finally revealed itself, emerging from the twisted spaces where dark matter pooled like cosmic fog. The Devourers were nightmares made manifest, biomechanical horrors that defied every law of physics and biology. Their ships looked grown rather than built, hulls of living metal that pulsed with organic rhythms while bristling with weapons that consumed matter itself. They were ancient beyond measure, older than most civilizations, and they had been hunting the research station with the patient hunger of apex predators. 3 Devourer cruisers materialized around the station, each one the size of a small city. Their hulls writhed with biomechanical tentacles, while weapon pods that looked like mechanical flowers opened to reveal energy cannons that glowed with sickly green light. These were the creatures that had once brought the galaxy to its knees, and now they had come to claim their prize. What happened next was less a battle than a demonstration of why humanity had been feared across the galaxy. The eternal vigil moved with impossible grace for something so massive, its engines flaring, as it positioned itself between the station and the Devourer fleet. Weapon ports along its hull opened like awakening eyes, revealing the business ends of cannons that could boil oceans. The first salvo was beyond anything Jinsu had ever imagined. Energy beams thick as city towers lanced out from the War Titan, each one carrying more power than his entire planet's electrical grid. They struck the lead Devourer cruiser with surgical precision, punching through biomechanical armor that had withstood the weapons of a dozen civilizations. Missile swarms followed, thousands of projectiles guided by tactical AI systems that could predict enemy movements before the Devourers themselves knew what they were going to do. Each missile was a masterwork of human engineering, capable of independent thought and armed with warheads that turned matter into pure energy. The Devourers tried to fight back, their biomechanical weapons spitting streams of consuming energy that could dissolve atoms. But the Eternal Vigil's defensive systems were ready, shields that had been perfected through 50 years of the most brutal war in galactic history, turned the attacking forces into harmless light, while point defense lasers picked off incoming projectiles with mechanical precision. Jinsu watched, in stunned silence as an entire Devourer fleet, creatures that had once terrorized star systems, were systematically dismantled by humanity's ultimate weapon. The War Titan fought with cold efficiency, each shot precisely calculated, each movement perfectly timed. There was no waste, no unnecessary destruction, just the methodical elimination of an ancient enemy. In exactly 12 minutes, 3 Devourer cruisers had been reduced to cooling debris that glowed with radioactive fire. The Eternal Vigil hung in space like an avenging angel, its weapons still glowing as steam vented from cooling systems. "Doctor." "Jinsu," came General Minho's voice again, somehow knowing his name though they had never met. "I would like to speak with you about the galaxy my people left behind." The news spread through hyperspace communication networks faster than anyone thought possible. From the gleaming towers of the core worlds to the mining colonies on the Galactic Rim, every species with a quantum transmitter received the same impossible message. Humanity's War Titan had returned from the dead. In the marble halls of the Hegemony High Council, Chancellor Vex 9 paced nervously on his 8 legs, while holographic displays showed tactical analyses of the Eternal Vigil. The insectoid leader's compound eyes reflected the flickering data streams as military advisors argued in panicked, chittering voices. "A single ship destroyed 3 Devourer cruisers in 12 minutes, General Crix reported, his mandibles clicking with anxiety. "Our entire battle fleet couldn't accomplish that in 12 hours. What does this mean for our control of the shipping lanes?" Meanwhile, in the crowded refugee camps of the Outer Rim, different conversations were taking place. Enslaved miners whispered the news in their dormitories, while oppressed colonists shared bootleg recordings of the battle. To them, the War Titan wasn't a threat. It was salvation arriving 2 centuries too late, but arriving nonetheless. Dr. Heywan had become the bridge between these two worlds, spending her days aboard the Eternal Vigil as General Minho's primary liaison. The Etherean scientist found herself walking through corridors that had once housed thousands of human crew members, past weapon systems that could crack planets, learning about a species that had burned bright and died young but left behind, a legacy that still shook the galaxy. The observation deck was her favorite place on the massive ship. It stretched for nearly a kilometer, with transparent aluminum windows that offered a perfect view of space. Today she stood beside Minho's holographic form, watching something that would have been impossible just weeks ago. Newly constructed human-designed fighters taking their first flights around the War Titan's hull. "Your people were remarkable," she told him, her scaled fingers tracing patterns on the cool metal railing. "Even in death they inspire hope in ways I never expected." Minho's digital form smiled as he watched the fighters execute perfect formation flights. Each ship was a work of art, sleek angular craft that somehow looked both beautiful and deadly. They had been built in the Eternal Vigil's massive construction bays using fabrication systems that could reshape matter at the molecular level. "Hope was always humanity's greatest weapon," Minho replied, his holographic hand gesticulating toward the fighter squadron. "We didn't have the strongest bodies like the Hegemony warriors. We couldn't manipulate energy fields like the Psych Collective. We weren't as naturally intelligent as your people, but we had something else. We never gave up, and we never left anyone behind." The fighter pilots were volunteers from dozens of species. Etherians like Heywan flew alongside towering Centaurians, whose 4 arms gave them perfect control over their ship's complex systems. Former Hegemony soldiers who had defected after witnessing the War Titan's power worked in formation with refugee miners who had never seen the inside of a cockpit until last week. All of them flew ships built from human designs, following tactical doctrines that had been perfected during the War of the Burning Sky. They moved with human determination, fought with human courage, and carried human values into battle even though most had never met a living human being. "It's incredible," Heywan murmured, watching an Etherian pilot execute a maneuver that would have been impossible in any other fighter design. "You've turned farmers and refugees into elite pilots in just 3 weeks. Human military doctrine was built around one simple principle," Minho explained, his eyes following the graceful dance of the fighters. "Anyone can become a warrior if they're fighting for something they believe in. We took ordinary people and gave them extraordinary tools, then showed them how to use those tools to protect what they loved." But their moment of peace was shattered when Yejin's voice echoed through the observation deck. General, long-range sensors are detecting massive hyperspace distortions. Something big is coming. The tactical displays materialized around them, showing sensor readings that made HFY's blood freeze in her veins. The Devourer response was swift and terrible. Their main fleet was emerging from the dark spaces between galaxies, a collection of world killers that had consumed entire star systems during their last rampage. Ships the size of moons materialized from hyperspace, their biomechanical hulls writhing with organic weapons that pulsed with malevolent life. Planet crackers that could split worlds in half flew alongside hive ships that carried millions of Devourer drones. At the center of it all was something that defied comprehension: the Queen Mind itself. The Queen Mind was less a ship and more a living space station, a biomechanical horror that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. Its consciousness was spread across 1,000 smaller ship bodies, each one a deadly weapon in its own right. This was the creature that had orchestrated the near extinction of galactic civilization, the ancient intelligence that had turned entire species into biomechanical slaves. By the ancestors, HFY whispered, her voice barely audible. I thought it was just a legend. No legend, Minho replied grimly, studying the tactical readouts with the cold efficiency of a military mind. I fought that thing during the final battle of the War of the Burning Sky. We barely managed to drive it back into the void, and that was with the entire human fleet. The enemy force was massive beyond comprehension, thousands of Devourer ships, accompanied by biomechanical constructs that looked like mechanical planets. They moved through space with the patient hunger of apex predators, their approach sending ripples through hyperspace that disrupted communications across 3 sectors. So, Minho mused, his holographic form straightening into the posture of a man who had faced impossible odds before. It seems the old enemy wants to finish what they started 2 centuries ago. Around them, the eternal vigil began to transform. Weapon systems that had been dormant came online with deep thrums of power. Shield generators that could deflect planet-killing weapons hummed to life. The ship's massive engines flared as it prepared for the battle that would determine the fate of the galaxy. Yejin, signal the Allied fleet, Minho commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded humanity's greatest battles. Tell them it's time for humanity's last crusade. We're going to finish what we started 200 years ago, one way or another. The war for the galaxy's soul was about to begin, and this time, there would be no retreat. The galactic core had become a battleground that defied imagination. Over 10,000 ships from dozens of species formed the largest unified fleet in recorded history, their combined firepower creating a constellation of war that stretched across light years. The eternal vigil led them all, its massive bulk cutting through space like a steel mountain crowned with the fires of dying stars. Dr. Jinsu stood on the War Titan's bridge, his 6 arms gripping the tactical rail as he watched space itself transform into a canvas of destruction. Around him, holographic displays showed the battle unfolding in real time. Etherian cruisers dancing with mechanical grace while Centaurian dreadnoughts unleashed salvos that could vaporize asteroids. Former hegemony ships fought alongside refugee vessels, all of them flying human tactical formations that turned individual ships into parts of a greater whole. But the enemy they faced was beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Devourer armada writhed through space like a living thing, biomechanical horrors that twisted reality around them. Ships the size of moons birthed smaller craft from organic launch bays, while planet killers that looked like mechanical spiders skittered between the stars, their weapon pods glowing with energies that made space itself recoil. At the center of it all was the Queen Mind, a biomechanical cathedral of living metal and organic circuits that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. But it wasn't just a ship. It was building something that made Jinsu's compound eyes water just to look at it. A weapon that seemed to eat light itself, creating a growing sphere of absolute darkness that pulled at the fabric of reality. General, Yejin's voice carried strain that Jinsu had never heard from the AI before. The weapon is charging faster than our models predicted. If it fires, the cascade effect will consume the entire galactic core. Billions of star systems will simply cease to exist. Minho's holographic form stood perfectly still, studying the tactical displays with the calm of someone who had faced the impossible before. His digital eyes processed information faster than any organic mind could follow, calculating trajectories and probabilities while the battle raged around them. Dr. Heywan floated nearby, her scaled features pale with terror, as she watched the reality-consuming weapon grow larger. "How is this possible?" she whispered. "They're not just building a weapon, they're unmaking the universe itself." "The Devourers were old when our sun was young," Minho replied, his voice carrying the weight of ancient knowledge. "They've had billions of years to perfect the art of consumption. This weapon doesn't just destroy matter, it converts the fundamental forces of reality into food for their endless hunger." Around them, the battle continued to rage. Human-designed fighters weaved between massive capital ships, their pilots, Etherians, Centaurians, reformed hegemony soldiers, flying with desperate courage against biomechanical horrors that violated every law of physics. Explosions bloomed like deadly flowers against the darkness, while energy beams thick as city towers lanced through space. But Jinsu could see what the others couldn't. They were losing. The Devourer fleet was too large, too ancient, too hungry. For every enemy ship destroyed, 2 more emerged from the dark spaces between dimensions. The Queen Mind's weapon continued to grow, its sphere of absolute nothingness now large enough to swallow entire planets. "Then we stop it," Minho said with finality, his holographic form turning to face his organic companions. "Heywan, evacuate to the Allied fleet immediately. Jinsu, prepare to receive a data transmission. Everything we've learned about human history, culture, and military doctrine." Heywan's forked tongue flicked out in agitation. "Sir, what are you planning? The fleet needs the Eternal Vigil's firepower to have any chance of victory." Minho's digital face softened, showing an expression that was purely human despite his artificial nature. "What humans do best," he smiled sadly. "We sacrifice everything to protect those who come after us." The War Titan began to change course, its massive engines flaring with power that turned space itself blue-white with contained stellar fire. Jinsu felt the ship accelerate beyond safe limits, every safety protocol overridden as Minho pushed the ancient vessel towards speeds that should have torn it apart. "No," Heywan whispered, understanding flooding her reptilian features. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," Minho replied, his voice gentle but final. "The weapon is too powerful, too well defended. But if we can get close enough, the Eternal Vigil's quantum core can create a cascade reaction that will destroy both the weapon and everything within 1,000 kilometers." Jinsu watched through the viewports as they accelerated toward the Queen Mind, the biomechanical horror growing larger until it filled their entire field of vision. Weapon fire from the Devourer fleet washed over the War Titan's shields, creating auroras of deadly energy that painted the hull in shifting colors. As they closed with the enemy superweapon, Minho began his final transmission. His voice echoed not just through the Allied fleet, but across every inhabited system in the galaxy, carried by communication arrays and quantum relays to billions of listening ears. "This is General Minho Prime, last guardian of humanity," he announced, his words carrying across the void to touch every species that had ever looked up at the stars and dreamed of something better. "My people are gone, but their spirit lives on in each of you who chose to stand against the darkness. Remember us not for our wars, but for what we fought to protect. Guard each other well." The Eternal Vigil plunged into the heart of the Queen Minds, weapon like a meteor falling into a black hole. The reality-consuming device tried to unmake the War Titan, but Minho had prepared for this moment. His quantum core detonated not in destruction, but in creation, a burst of pure possibility that rewrote the laws of physics for a brief, shining moment. The explosion was visible from neighboring galaxies, a nova of light that burned away the darkness and sent the Queen Mind screaming back into the void. But more than that, it transmitted something precious across the galaxy. The complete cultural and military database of humanity, uploaded to every ship in the Allied fleet and beyond. In the aftermath, as the surviving Devourer forces retreated, into the dark spaces where they belonged. The coalition species came together to form something new. They called it the Terran Compact, named after the world that had birthed the Guardians who saved them all. They adopted human military doctrine, learning to fight not just with weapons but with hope. They embraced human values of protection and sacrifice, understanding that true strength came from standing together rather than standing alone. Most importantly, they made the human promise their own, to never abandon a distress call no matter who sent it or where it came from. Jinsu stood on the bridge of a new ship, built from human designs but crewed by a dozen different species. Through the viewport, he could see the galaxy healing, new alliances forming between worlds that had been enemies for centuries. Humanity was extinct, but their greatest legacy lived on, not in weapons or technology, but in the hearts of those they had inspired to be better than they ever thought possible. The watch continued, carried now by those who remembered what it meant to be guardians of the light. The end.